final solution to the Jewish question, the most euphemistic of names for genocide, the attempted murder of an entire people, an entire nation, every man, woman, and child. The final solution to the Jewish question. I hate euphemism, because euphemism allows otherwise decent, normal people to commit horrors that are unspeakable, because they play a little game and hide the reality from themselves. I would much rather we used straightforward language, even if it's harsh, because it's truthful. Whereas euphemism is by its very nature the worst form of lie. It is a lie that uses a little bit of the truth to seal the deal. Now, the anti-Jewish policies of Nazi Germany begin in 1933, and they intensify up through 1941. But in 1941, with Hitler's invasion of Russia, you enter the real phase of active genocide. And the high point of that is 42 through 44. That is when most of the Jews are murdered. But it really begins in earnest with the invasion of the Soviet Union in June of 1941. And it goes up until the end of Hitler's Reich in May of 45. The great historian of the final solution, Raoul Hilberg, an American Jew, said that you can describe anti-Semitism in its three phases of intensity, each phase described by a declarative sentence. The first phase of anti-Semitism is, you shall not live as one of us. We will make distinctions that separate you from us. You may be here, you may look like us, you may have ancestors that have been in this area as long as ours have, but you are not us. We're different. And that difference is something we are never going to forget. Honestly, if you want to know why I'm a conservative on social issues, it's because I actually believed in a lot of the civil rights stuff of the 1960s. I believed that you should be judged by the content of your character and not the color of your skin. And since the year before I was born, that was achieved in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 being signed into law. But since then, the descendants of those wonderful reformers like Reverend Martin Luther King have refused to let us forget race. The goal should be a colorblind society, not a society that constantly wonders how many black people are in management in sports teams, or in the case of feminism, how many women are the CEOs of companies or on boards of directors, or how many this or how many that. The whole point of these groups is to perpetuate themselves as grievance organizations, to perpetual victims. Whereas the real goal should be a colorblind society, a gender-neutral society, a society where people are judged on the basis of their choices, their words, and their actions, not unchosen birth characteristics. The first phase of anti-Semitism is, you may not live as one of us. And this was codified into German law in the Nuremberg laws. The Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of their citizenship. You're no longer a German citizen, you're a subject. You no longer have the rights of a citizen. You no longer have rights. You're banned from professions like being a medical doctor or being a school teacher or being anything that is respected or powerful or influential, especially involving children. You're not allowed to hold property over a certain amount, and that amount will constrict every year until basically you're not even allowed to own the clothes on your back, the rags that they become. They're privileges. They're not your property. They're allowed to you. They're not yours. And of course, Nazi officials, other than Hitler, profited mightily from the squeezing of Jewish property from Jewish families. Interracial relationships involving Jews and Gentiles was forbidden. Previous ones were nullified. And people were sterilized or killed for being caught alone in a room with a German maiden. Finally, Jews who are no longer a part of everyday society. They're no longer people whose shops you go by or patronize. Ooh, you're such a nice shop. No, they're no longer shops that you go into as customers. They no longer are among your doctors or your lawyers or your teachers or the engineer on the local trolley that makes its way through town. Jews have been relocated out of the everyday life of most Germans. And then they're going to be relocated out of Germany too, and off the earth, as living things anyway. They'll be relocated until the afterlife. But that's to come. And one of the shameful things is that how they define a Jew, as in anyone with a single Jewish grandparent, and other classification and legal precedents. The Nazis used the Jim Crow laws of the post-Civil War, pre-1965 or 64 Civil Rights Act American South as their role model, because that gave them a way of defining who is and who is not a Jew in a way that suited them by allowing anyone with even a single Jewish grandparent, regardless of how fervent a Baptist they might be, to be classified as Jewish. It's a matter of race, not a matter of faith. Now, I've gone over that one quickly because we went over it before World War II. Now we come to the second phase. You shall not live among us, and that's what relocation was hinting at. So Dachau concentration camp is baby's first concentration camp. It's set up even in time so early that the SA, the Sturmabteilung, the brown-shirted street thugs of the Nazi Party, they ran it for a while until they were displaced by the SS. And at Dachau, the German Nazis learned how to deal with troublesome people in the camps, how to gain psychological dominance, physical dominance over them, to control them, to use them for the profit of the nation as slaves, to keep them down in here as well as out here. Now, when Hitler goes into earnest, after the beginning of World War II, but before the entry of the United States into World War II, Hitler wants to put on a show for the world. So one of the things that he does is he establishes ghettos. One of the ghettos is at Theresienstadt. Now, Theresienstadt is in an old Czech Jewish ghetto from the Middle Ages. It is an old city surrounded by walls. And these walls look like forested hills. There's a berm going up with beautiful green grass and trees around it. And that's to keep the outside world from noticing that there's a community of Jews near there. You only see that when you go around the thing and find the gate. Now, Theresienstadt was the model ghetto of the Nazi Party. If you were a German Jew that was a World War I medal winner, a hero of World War I who fought for the Kaiser and the Second Reich, you would be sent to Theresienstadt. If you were a prominent doctor or a famous lawyer or a writer, if you were a Jew of stature, they'd send you to Theresienstadt. It was the elite ghetto. They even had little brochures where you could sign up for the kind of apartment you wanted. Did you want to have an apartment with a south-facing view? Did you want garden boxes for your windows? So Theresienstadt is going to be used for its original purpose of housing Jews. But it's not going to be limited to the population of the medieval town, of the medieval ghetto. In fact, the Germans are going to cram in 5 or 10 times the number of people that Theresienstadt was designed for. So in the early 1940s, uh, Jews would arrive, and some of them very well-to-do with luggage and eyeglasses and ties and suits, and they'd walk from the railroad station several miles to Theresienstadt, and those who couldn't walk would be brought by a cart, and then they'd line up and they'd hear a speech by the town elders of Theresienstadt, Jews like themselves, who run their affairs. The Nazis have given the Jews this town, and when you enter, your stuff is going to be taken from you and searched and processed, the Jewish leaders say, but oh, don't worry, you'll get it back when you're inside. So then you line up and you process, and maybe you remark to the SS men that, remember, you had an apartment with a south-facing view and garden boxes. And if you're lucky, they don't say anything. And then you go inside through the gates, and it's too late. You see people dying on the streets. You see unattended dead bodies left on the streets to rot. You see crowded situations everywhere. The smell inside the city of untreated sewage. If you're lucky, the Nazis will actually have placed you somewhere. Otherwise, you basically wander until you fight for a place to live, fighting other Jews, of course, because when a German goes by, you're supposed to go to the wall and avert your eyes. And this is the reality inside the elite ghetto for the wondrous Jews. They're crowded in there so that the weak will simply die of stress, of the stressful conditions inside of Theresienstadt. During the war, when Hitler was trying to make public relations points, he would invite the Red Cross to Theresienstadt, and he even had a film made, Hitler Gives a Town to the Jews. You can look for it on YouTube. And it shows the wonderful conditions at Theresienstadt, because before the film was made, they emptied it of most of the excess people, sending them straight to Auschwitz and the death chambers. And they had everyone clean it up. And they had symphonies and plays and children's games and schools, and everything was painted and looked wonderful, and clothing had been brought in for the Jews to wear, and they were allowed to be a little cleaner. And the Red Cross men, many of whom were Swedes or Swiss or other neutrals, and nobody said anything. Nobody hinted to these guys what was really going on. Because if they did, the people they loved, worse than. A similar sort of thing without the elite stuff is done in the city of Warsaw, former capital of Poland, on a much larger scale. Warsaw Ghetto, which was originally designed for about 50,000 people, ended up having over 500,000 people in it at one time. That's 500,000 people. That's 10 times the population it's supposed to have. And again, it was basically used as a warehouse for the conquered realms Jews, and you shove them in there, and those that die, die, and those that don't, they can be brought out and sent to the labor camps or the death camps as the SS decides. You may not live among us. Now, you may ask, why didn't the Jews rise up? There were one or two cases early on where Jews did resist. And what was done to them was they were used for medical experiments, and they were cut open and basically vivisected while they were still alive. And word of this got out. Better to die quickly in a dignified way rather than go through something like that in your last moments on earth. There was the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, which I told you about. That's one of the few times, along with rebellion at Sobibor, where Jews fought back. But they were gathered. You may not live among us.